Hey, this is Aiden, and today I'm going to show you how you can document any API using Optic's open source tools. So to get started, all you have to do is run API init, and this configures Optic to work with your API. You provide it the port your API runs on, and the command you usually use to start the API. In this case, it's npm server start. Then you have to make one small code change that's pulling an environment variable called Optic API port, and using that as the port you start the API on. So now that Optic is set up, we can use the API start command to run our server. And when you run API start, Optic throws a proxy in between the traffic from your web app, Postman, your API test, curl, whatever you're using to test the API, and the API process itself. And this proxy is constantly diffing the behavior of the API against your API specification. So you get a nice diff of new changes to the API, and it catches issues when your API changes unexpectedly. So let's open up this little example to-do app. There's a few different API endpoints here for checking and unchecking these to-do items, updating them. Obviously, there's an API call to load all of these in the beginning, and then there's an API call to create a new to-do. Because I'm running API start, Optic is able to see all this traffic and how my API actually behaves. And when it detects new behavior, it tells me to run API spec. This is the first time I'm using Optic for this API, so it's going to help me document it initially. So I have to give it the path. This is to-do ID. And then just like Google Drive gives you suggestions, Optic gives you suggestions for how to modify your spec over time. So I can add this patch request. It's asking me to pick a concept name for the request body. It's the to-do write. It's now recognizing there's a 200 response, so I can approve that. And it looks like this is my to-do read model, so I type that in. There's another endpoint that it saw. This is the to-dos endpoint. So I click add path. I can approve the get response. And then Optic automatically figures out that it's a list of these to-do read models because I told it what those are before. So I can approve this, add it to my spec. Going to come back here to the final endpoint. This is for creating new to-dos. It knows that I'm using the to-do write model in the request body, and it knows that the response is going to be a to-do read. Again, all automatic, all based on viewing the traffic and analyzing it. When I'm ready, I can merge these changes into my API spec and view them here within Optic's API editor. This runs completely locally, and it keeps the data stored within your repo, so it never touches our servers. I can use the API design features here, or if I want, I can generate a Swagger file, and that'll get created right away in this output folder. You can see this is the Swagger file for my API. We've been going for just under 4 minutes now, and we already have this API documented automatically. But what about when the API changes, which is very common as you're developing something? Well, let's go in and add this due date field to every to-do, and then we'll run API start again. And like I said before, Optic is constantly diffing my API spec against its actual behavior. So when it sees that this due date field is being returned and used, it's going to tell me again that a new behavior was observed. So I'll run API spec, it'll open up, and I'll get a suggestion from Optic to add due date to the to-do read model. I'll hit approve, confirm, merge it in, and now due date is part of my API spec. So that's how you can use Optic to document and maintain the specification for any API. This is a foundation. We have a lot of really interesting features coming out soon that are going to support design-first workflows really well and make it really simple for consumers to use the APIs that are documented with Optic. We're an open source project. You can find us on useoptic.com, and we look forward to talking about how we can make APIs more developer-friendly for you and your team. Thanks so much for your time, and hope you have a good rest of your day.